The turbolift's doors slid open, revealing an empty lift lobby beyond, as pale and grey as the rest of the ship. The still silence was only broken up by the hum of two blue lightsabers and the faint sizzling of freshly cut blaster droids on the elevator's floor. Obi-Wan turned his off. Anakin resisted the urge to. The dark side was suffocatingly present there, prickling his skin and leaving his throat coarse as though he was back on Ilum or Tatooine at night. Besides Obi-Wan, his ignited saber brought the only form of warmth to this foreboding place. It didn't help Dooku, all of a sudden, became quite a bit more difficult to sense out. His very presence left its mark on the Force certainly, but the point from which it seeped out was hidden. No doubt the Count had immersed himself far deeper into Kate's meditation, wanting to keep his presence a surprise. The fact he was detectable during their approach there was most definitely a conscious decision by Dooku. Or maybe an oversight? After all, Obi-Wan couldn't tell he was there from the Force. Anakin, Obi-Wan's voice jolted him out of the trance he'd fallen into. His master cast a meaningful look to the still ignited lightsaber. As ever he appeared calm. Anakin envied his ability to not sense or ignore the chill. Rescue, not mayhem. Of course. The saber was deactivated, though Anakin kept his grip firmly around the focusing crystal inside. Sorry, it's just the dark side. I've never felt it like this. Not even on Tatooine. No doubt the Count's prowess with it has substantially increased. It has been 3 years after all. Anakin somehow doubted this. Something, perhaps from the Force, was telling, no, warning him there was more to this than meets the eye. But when he tried to probe for more answers, there was only a thick fog where clarity should have been. With another deep, almost shuddering breath, he let the frustration and chill pass into then out of him, evaporating into almost a cold exhale. Well done. What? That breathing maneuver, there was a ghost of a smile on Obi-Wan's face. You've saved me the need to lecture. Don't worry, Master, he smiled back. I'm sure you'll find something else to lecture me about in no time. I suppose, Obi-Wan bowed ruefully. I shall have to stop trying to train you. Eventually. That's the first time you've admitted it. He laughed. Yes, it appears this day continues to be one of admissions and revelations for us both. The ship rumbled, drawing their attention back to the door on the opposite end of the lobby. With slow, careful steps, they made their way to it, backs pressed to walls on the opposite ends. Just before the sensors would detect their approach and fling the doors open, Obi-Wan and Anakin exchanged one final look. There was no need for words or promises or reassurances. The synchronicity that had built between them since the battle had begun told them all they needed to. With the chill almost entirely beaten back, Anakin entered the room alongside his master with a calm certainty. This mirrored approach continued into the bank of chairs each side of the massive situation table dominating the center of the general's quarters main room. It was a darkly lit place, the only illumination coming from a huge, curving wall on the far end. Outside, one could see the battle raging on with flashes of turbo laser fire and explosions endlessly going off. No doubt the fighting knocked the power out of this section of the ship. Against the carnage, there was the silhouette of a single, tall chair. Cautiously, they approached, lightsabers felt firmly in their palms. Bodies poised to strike or block at the first sign of trouble, be it from droids or Sith Lords. When the lights came back, both of them froze at the sight of the room's only occupant, the Chancellor. Anakin's earlier observation from R2 projection was correct. The Chancellor had gotten older, almost impossibly so. And he was afraid. Anakin had never seen the look on his face before, not when the separatist movement gained momentum or during the numerous instances where Republic forces were beaten back or a system chose to leave the Republic. Chancellor Palpatine was a rock, the rock upon the whole Republic depended on. To see him like this brought a pang of guilt and pity for this brave man. The latter in particular prompted Anakin to give the Chancellor a welcoming, friendly smile as he and Obi-Wan approached. Chancellor, his master spoke first, a respectful greeting to his tone. He bowed. I apologize for seeing you again in these circumstances. As do I, Master Kenobi. Palpatine managed a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. It grew warmer when he glanced over to Anakin. And you, my boy. Don't worry, sir, we'll get you out of this place in no time. The temperature in the room dropped noticeably, instantly. Before the Chancellor's face even contorted back into the frightened look, before his lips even anxiously shouted Anakin's name and before either one of them even heard the clank of boot heels and magnapeds resounded through the mostly silent room, both he and Obi-Wan spun around towards the welcoming committee. Atop the entrance balcony, Dooku stood and surveyed the image before him. It brought out a pleasant smile, a Sith standing far above and looking down on two Jedi, far below. Well, two Jedi and the greatest Lord of the Sith to ever live, but why allow pedantry to ruin one's enjoyment? From this vantage point, he began the final assessment for the task ahead. Gathering the Force into himself, as much as he demanded, Dooku felt the potency of the dark side course through him. The wear of 83 years of life vanished as they always did, leaving him feeling as a young man of 30, of 20. This was nothing next to the true sensation, however. For the dark side did not simply make one strong, it made one the center of the universe itself. The Force existed only to serve the individual, not the opposite as the foolish Jedi believed. Through this simple, reflexive practice, the general's quarters became something else entirely. His perceptions became surgically precise to all three beings situated beneath him. Master Sidious, as always, radiated a power beyond power. A pitch black, absolute nothingness that revealed nothing of itself to anyone, a living black hole of the Force. Kenobi was his exact opposite. He was the very embodiment of the antiquated order he belonged to, a transparent being, a window into the sunlight of the Force, a being who lived to serve it first and foremost and who would gladly abandon everything into becoming an extension to it. Skywalker is where Dooku found himself. Puzzled. On Tithe, mere hours ago, the boy was a storm cloud, always simmering and eager to unleash itself on anyone unfortunate and unskilled enough to defeat it. Now, he was closer to a bright sun, strong certainly and fully capable of bursting should the need arise but not inherently hostile, waiting to answer conflict instead of initiating it. One might even think he could become a proper Jedi, Dooku thought with amusement, the thought almost ridiculous enough to prompt a burst of laughter. His lip barely twitched. Gathering the Force around himself, Dooku levitated gently from the balcony and brought himself to their level. General Kenobi, Anakin Skywalker, he greeted each with a pleasant tone, a nod to each one. I am so pleased you've come. Get help. Sidious, Palpatine, whispered in a furious, authentic-sounding panic. You must get help. Neither one of you is a match for a Sith Lord. The Chancellor is correct, Dooku smiled. Gentlemen, though I find it difficult to address you as such, lay down your weapons and no harm shall come to you. He expected an empty threat, childish bravado from Skywalker. Again, the boy surprised him. The two merely exchanged glances at one another. Did they look amused? Funny, Kenobi spoke first, casting aside his cloak. We were going to offer the same to you. Dooku allowed himself a small laugh, fingers gently grazing past his lightsaber hiding behind the armor-weave cape around his shoulders. Your weapons, please, gentlemen. Let's not make a mess of this in front of the Chancellor. As expected, their answer was unhooking their lightsabers first. Now, gentlemen. Should the three of us cross blades, I fear there will be a most unseemly mess before the Chancellor's own eyes. Why, harm may befall him directly. A scenario I have no interest in. Why don't I believe you? Kenobi ignited his blade, gracefully taking steps forward, his arms positioned into the balanced, two-handed Ataru guard. You would have killed the Chancellor long ago if you wanted him dead. Skywalker moved at the same pace, blade held above his head in the usual Sheen opening stance. But your master wouldn't approve of that, would he? Dooku's expression remained the same. Once again, the urge to laugh was strong. Skywalker, the fool, was certainly correct about Sidious finding the idea of Palpatine's death most troublesome. Instead, he feigned a resigned sigh, cape gently pushed aside and revealed his own lightsaber. Surrender, Count, you may not receive another chance to, Kenobi spoke, voice imperceptibly hardening with finality. Unless you happen to be hiding Yoda, Dooku unhooked his lightsaber, lifting it forward into the customary Makoshi salute. Then I'm afraid your threats are nothing at all. His red blade came to life, wrist performing a twist for the salute then resting at Dooku's side. Neither Kenobi or Dooku moved. Skywalker took a long, calming breath. Outside, the sounds of war momentarily intensified from the silence. All three stood on sure feet as another blast hit the invisible hand, causing the massive vessel to quiver in a way ordinary men would be sent tumbling down. Dooku falsely glanced with concern over his shoulder, letting them think he'd let his guard down. When the tremor finally ceased, all three moved. Kenobi leapt theatrically, Skywalker swung as though to block a blaster bolt, Dooku elegantly deflected. With the barest flick of his wrist, his red blade danced through the air in a near mesmerizing swirl of red ripostes. Each one done with expert ease, mastered finesse, a true gentleman's elegance. Kenobi and Skywalker, by comparison, seemed as trained circus beasts. Oh, they could perform all manner of impressive-seeming tricks in concert, thrusts, blocks, leaps. But what did this unity account for when their very craft was flawed? Kenobi's Ataro was a painful thing to behold. So many hours spent dueling Qui-Gon and Yoda both awarded Dooku with an intimate knowledge of the form's capabilities. A woefully wasteful series of jumps, overexposing lightsaber flourishes, and pathetic defensive capabilities. Skywalker seemed to fight against his own instincts. His blade work kept close to the body for protection against projectile fire, yet clumsily put into a situation it was ill-suited to. Still, a form by itself was not at fault. Enslavement to it was. Dooku stood between them, a rock of red against a constantly incoming sea of blue. Kenobi's thrust failing nearly sent him crashing into the floor, a deft balancing act with his hand ensured a safe landing. Skywalker came from behind, held back by the thrusts and ripostes sent against his own flurry of blade strokes. Dooku made his laugh at such efforts obvious, letting the boy see and hear the satisfaction he gleaned from his futile offensive. With a flick of his free hand, Skywalker was sent hurtling through the air, above the table and halting only when his spine met steel. Another flick caused Kenobi's swing to turn into a long, painful slide on the opposite wall. While Skywalker gasped and tried to rise, Dooku flung chairs at him through the force, each one striking Skywalker back down the moment he seemed to catch his feet again. There it is, Dooku thought with satisfaction as he could feel a rise in Skywalker's anger. The humiliation of being toyed with cutting past his newfound calm. With a snarl, he carved the remaining chairs away. Dooku anticipated a bold, hot-blooded leap to follow. Instead, Skywalker simply stopped, his breathing heavy and his expression morphing from anger to shame to calm. All with a swift, inhale then exhale. Dooku's smile faltered at that. With another flick of his free hand, the table itself was tossed at the boy. Let us see how you center yourself with Kenobi's head at my boot. Dooku could see it in his mind's eye. Skywalker would waste precious moments cutting and leaping to Dooku. Kenobi would thrust. Dooku would effortlessly sidestep it and with a wrist flick, cut his way through Kenobi's arms and head in a near instantaneous motion. His smile returned when events began to play out just so. Skywalker carved, Kenobi thrust and Dooku flicked for the kill. There was no hiss of lightsaber cutting flesh, the clank of a dropped weapon or the thud of dismembered limbs. Mid-attack, Kenobi's expression transformed from shocked and pressed to mildly amused. His posture, momentum, and lightsaber transformed as well, from offense to defense. With a simple flick of his own, Kenobi's blade met Dooku's in a perfect block. What? A shadow passed over Dooku, with a single blue light with it. Skywalker leapt but with a strong, overhead slash. The speed, precision and sheer power of it were so great, Dooku felt the heat from his blade pass mere inches from his face. What? Skywalker was on him immediately, a blinding wave of blue light crashing down against his red. Each step was the blow of a hammer, a step forward in and out of itself. The sheer physical strength would have proven troublesome enough, but the speed and ease of his footwork combined with it made for some of the finest Jimso work Dooku had ever seen. Most outstandingly of all, Skywalker's ferocity was not fueled by hate. Possibly without even knowing it himself, Skywalker simply attacked as a matter of his chosen form, a necessary but dispassionate aggressiveness required for a naturally aggressive fighting style. Skywalker was calm in spite of the battle. Not because of it. What? When Dooku tried to counterattack through the kinetic weave of offensive energy, Skywalker did not block, he did not have to. Kenobi stepped forward and did so for him. With ease mirroring Dooku's own, Kenobi's defense was simplicity itself, no movement was wasted, no opening was left. Kenobi was an immovable object. A master of Sorisu. It was then a horrible realization came over Dooku, who tried and painfully failed to pierce defense or match offense. Awkwardly, unseemly, stepping back more and more at the approaching Jedi warriors. They had played him for a complete fool earlier. The realization came with a dash of genuine fear, that they might possibly be able to defeat him. Their amused looks alone proved as much. This would not do at all. "Droids, open fire," he commanded, giving himself a momentary reprieve long enough for his boot to meet Skywalker's chin and to jump himself back to the balcony. The super battle droids did as commanded, hurtling thick, red bolts of blaster fire at the Jedi converging at his location from both sides. It would not buy Dooku much time to gather back his energies, but it would have to do. It also split them apart, providing him with an opportunity. Simultaneously, the two reached the balcony, effortlessly cutting down both of the droids. Skywalker opened with another strong, overhead strike. Dooku did not meet with a blade. Instead, he gathered the energies of the Force into his palm and formed a tight grip around Kenobi's neck. Skywalker's concentration faltered long enough for another kick to meet his stomach, pushing him away. Kenobi gasped painfully, clutching at his neck, entirely helpless to fight back the tendril of the dark side around his neck. Were there more time, Dooku would simply apply the same pressure, but Skywalker was rising and time was not a luxury he could afford. Still, there were many other ways of breaking one's neck without crushing it in a figurative hand. Anakin grunted, his back aching again from the wall. He ignored it, his ears and danger sense in the Force picking up on Obi-Wan's own, far worse pain. His master's eyes bulged, neck squeezed tight by Dooku's dark side power. Getting up to his knees, Anakin thought about striking the former Jedi, breaking his concentration. But something else, a sensation in the Force, told him that wouldn't work. Another brief flash of panic, fear, and anger passed through him, particularly when Dooku's deep, rumbling laughter accompanied Obi-Wan being tossed across the whole room, head poised to shatter against a nearby steel wall. With a quick, hasty breath, Anakin fell into his very, very recent exercise and simply acted. His organic arm reached out and stopped Obi-Wan in mid-air. The three of them held still for a moment, Dooku staring at Obi-Wan, Anakin fighting back against his grip. Before the Count could do anything else, Anakin's other hand thrust forward as well, pushing him off the balcony with such force the very railing bent and snapped away. Dooku fell, Obi-Wan was gently put back down, and Anakin moved at once. Reigniting his lightsaber, he leapt down from the balcony, falling 15 feet away from the Sith Lord. It was almost funny, watching him wheeze and struggle to get back up after appearing so invincible for so many years. But Anakin let this thought flow out of him as well. Instead, he marched with a steady, methodical pace. Obi-Wan joined him, and without a spoken word, the two let Dooku rise back to his feet before bringing everything they had down on top of him. The outcome was inevitable. Obi-Wan outmatched the hard-breathing Count's elegant twists and turns with a lightsaber. Anakin battered down his defenses with strength but dispassion that surprised himself. His body almost moving completely all on its own, not even falling back on 13 years' worth of combat reflexes. It just knew, and that was enough as far as Anakin was concerned. Eventually, they pushed Dooku so far back, they'd reached the Chancellor again, who was observing everything with a quiet intensity. There was no fear anymore from him, but Anakin noted there was no joy either. A part of him was saddened by the Chancellor not seeming more impressed by this frontline view of Jedi vs. Sith swordplay. He let go of that too with a calming breath. Instead, he allowed Dooku's slow, sloppy stab attempted at him be met with a fierce block of Anakin's lightsaber. The momentary switch in their offensive-defensive roles left the Count confused and vulnerable enough for Obi-Wan's own lightsaber to meet the back of Dooku's palm and sear into it. A loud, pained howl escaped Dooku's mouth, falling to his knees, clutching the fresh burn mark, while Obi-Wan, with an effortless wrist flick, cut the Sith's lightsaber in half in mid-air. "No," Dooku whispered, disbelief clear in his eyes and voice. This cannot." "I am quite certain it is," Obi-Wan said, voice sounding mild but rough from the strangling. "You've lost, Count." "Don't even try pulling another trick with lightning," Anakin warned, remembering one of the most painful experiences of his entire life quite vividly before another exhale sent it away. "Surrender, now." "I would agree to it if I were you," Chancellor Palpatine spoke up, his voice carrying the same strength and fortitude Anakin had attributed to his unshakable dignity in holding the Republic together. "Remember my offer you so easily dismissed earlier, Count. I give it to you again, Surrender and you may come out of this war in better shape than the other separatist leaders. Dooku looked at the Chancellor, his eyes seeming not quite able to meet the gaze of his Republic counterpart. For a moment, Obi-Wan and Anakin both tensed, waiting for Dooku to try something else. Another phase of the trap, a trick of the Force, anything to help him slither away. Instead, the old, former Jedi Master let out a long, pained sigh. From him, Anakin felt a drop in hostility through the Force. Among other things, such as profound fatigue. Rising to his full height, Dooku rearranged his cape and tidied up his ruffled pants and long-sleeved black shirt. Then, he extended his shaky arms forward, his face looking as masterfully aristocratic as it was before. Very well, gentlemen, I hereby surrender myself to you. Obi-Wan and Anakin traded looks. His old master spoke first. Your surrender is accepted. Dooku nodded to him, right before Anakin's gloved hand struck him right in the nose. The Count tumbled onto the floor, gasping painfully before falling unconscious but alive. Anakin. Obi-Wan's voice reverberated in an almost shout. His old, clenched jaw scowling scolding look back in full force. What are you? We have to get him and the Chancellor off the ship, Anakin replied with complete calm. I'll feel a lot better doing so with him unconscious and helpless rather than awake and capable of scheming. Obi-Wan's eyes narrowed, hands on both hips. Before he even admitted it to himself or especially to Anakin, somehow, his old apprentice knew he'd agree with it. Very reluctantly. All right, he said with a long, suffering breath. Anakin smiled and reached out to tie Dooku's hands together when Obi-Wan's arm stopped him. But you are responsible for carrying and keeping him alive. Understood? A flash of childish indignation crossed Anakin's mind, to tell his master off, that he wasn't a mere Padawan anymore. Instead, Anakin let it go with a long, suffering breath, nodding along. Fair enough. Allow me to get those for you, Chancellor. Obi-Wan smiled at the Republic's leader and reached into the mechanisms of the chair's shackles through the Force. In the instant it took for him to wave a hand, he became intimately familiar with the simple nuts and bolts to its design, prompting them to harmlessly open with a loud clicking sound. Yes, thank you, Master Kenobi, Palpatine said, rising on such shaky feet that Obi-Wan offered his arm. And you, of course, Anakin. Anytime, sir, Anakin said without looking up, busy binding Dooku's hands together with something that was not portable shackles. Is that fiber cord? He asked, not quite believing it. Anakin looked up, grinning while his hands bound Dooku's. He won't be waving this away with the Force. Obi-Wan was sure of that. Even a well-trained Jedi, once bound by fiber cord, would find themselves in quite a precarious situation. Nothing short of a lightsaber or blaster bolt could break such a bind, not even the power of Force-augmented raw strength. It was an inspired idea yet still somehow too pedestrian for his audacious former apprentice. I'm surprised you haven't tied all his limbs together. Anakin's grin became a wolfish smile. Obi-Wan felt the urge to point out the pettiness behind the idea, but once again, his former student's practicality won out. The fact he secretly found the idea of Dooku put into that position most amusing played no factor at all. Not in the least. Instead, he turned back towards the Chancellor. Are you hurt? Can you run? A sheepish smile played at Palpatine's lips. I haven't run since I was a boy on Naboo. But I will do my part to keep up. Emphasizing the point by releasing Obi-Wan's arm, the Chancellor took a few unsure, then steady steps forward, moving away from the chair. Anakin had cast Dooku's cloak away to search his person for any other hidden weapons or tools at his disposal, but found none. In no time at all, he'd bound both of the Count's hands and feet behind his back, placing the Sith Lord over his shoulder with absolute ease. Obi-Wan's expression did not falter. Palpatine, on the other hand, masked his laughter with a convincing-sounding cough. Their brief levity was cut short when a tremor of considerable force, the strongest they'd felt thus far, shook the ship. Is there an escape craft for us? He asked them. We can't use our starfighters, Obi-Wan replied. Not enough room. There were plenty of other ships down in the hangar, sir. A 5-minute turbo lift ride back down will get us to them. Assuming we don't run into any trouble with that again. Obi-Wan pointedly reminded him, taking point in their small group with Palpatine in the middle and Anakin at the back. Their escapade simply getting up the spire were the stuff of a HoloNet feature farce, to put it lightly. A repeat, with a civilian and prisoner of war, would be most troublesome indeed. We won't know until we try, Master. Obi-Wan did not need the Force to know something would go wrong before they'd even reached the turbolift. Apparently, during their duel with Dooku, it was called someplace else. He tried to call it back from the nearby wall panel, to no avail. "I'll call R2, Anakin said, slipping out his bent-looking comlink out. R2? R2. I need you to activate elevator 3224. He shook it. 3224, do you hear me? Nothing? No, not since someone stepped on it. Obi-Wan pointedly avoided the reminder of their numerous turbolift-related fiascos, and his part during one of them, and the fact his own comlink was lost somewhere down the shaft, possibly in the same turbolift jumping battle. His astromech, R4, had been dismantled during the flight there. They certainly didn't have enough fiber cord to lower themselves down. Briefly, amusingly, right out of Anakin's playbook, Obi-Wan considered the idea of taking the Chancellor over his shoulder and the two of them lifting another down the shaft slowly through the Force. As he stroked his beard, considering their further options, the doors slid open, revealing an operational turbolift pod on the other side. Anakin's smile could be heard from the back. I knew he'd come through. The turbolift suddenly shot upward and the ship didn't just shake but shifted. Immediately, they all knew the artificial gravity had gone completely awry. No doubt the Republic bombardment had done its job to Grievous' flagship. What was once the floor was angled more to a 90-degree angle. Obi-Wan's arm immediately grabbed Palpatine's, his other hand taking hold to the right side of the open turbolift door. Anakin ran up and grabbed the left. Before they were left dangling from the new ceiling, both Jedi leapt into the shaft with a burst of Force-enhanced strength. Goodness! Palpatine panted, clinging to Obi-Wan's arm fiercely. Are all your missions so unpredictable? Obi-Wan offered. Exciting? Anakin suggested. Complicated? The Jedi shared knowing a glance. More or less, Obi-Wan answered, taking point once again. Though the sooner we leave, the less complicated it will get. In silence, they proceeded down the coning spire on feet. Neither Obi-Wan nor Anakin voiced their concerns openly, but both simply knew what they were. If the spire had titled to an angle where people could walk on it, that meant the ship was indisputably plummeting straight down. It also meant the hangar bay was to be a mess by the time they reached it, with dozens of ships flung this way and back in the failing gravity. The worst of those, quite expectedly, came true. It happened around level 102, a third of the way down the conning spire. There was a sharp tremor again, a resounding boom of gargantuan engines reverberating through the entire hull, and finally, another artificial gravity shift. Straight ahead was about to become its naturally intended straight down. Thinking fast, Obi-Wan spotted a pair of turbolift doors right at his feet. Wasting not a moment, his lightsaber flew and ignited, illuminating the shaft with bright blue. Slashing the door's control panel open, the device sizzled and burned, revealing multiple wires inside. He still wasn't fast enough. The gravity lurched vertically, the entire ship repositioning itself back to normal. Before even realizing it, Obi-Wan's hand grabbed hold of a dangling wire from the control panel. Palpatine clung for dear life still. Anakin, who'd fallen last, grabbed onto Obi-Wan's left leg, his own free hand grasping at Dooku's unconscious form at the end of their makeshift rope of bodies. A moment later, the turbolift doors opened, a whole meter above his outstretched hand. Out of this whole situation, what annoyed Obi-Wan the most was his lightsaber. In the ridiculous scramble of hanging on for dear life, he'd let go of his lightsaber and watched it fall ever deeper down the shaft, vanishing seemingly into nothingness. The fact Anakin was there to see this particularly stung. Master. Now is not the time for gloating. It's not about that, Anakin assured him, sounding fairly sincere all the while. Obi-Wan realized what it was too far above them. At the very top of the conning spire, came a gentle, warbling noise soon accompanied by the sounds of turbolift brakes unlocking. A sudden downdraft came, smelling of burning oil, joined by a turbolift swiftly moving straight down. Oh, Obi-Wan said mildly. R2, Anakin shouted, hoping the sound reached the comlink attached to his utility belt. Shut down the elevator. There's no time. We have to fall. Fall? Palpatine repeated with a shaky laugh. Master Kenobi, you can't be. He was, and so they fell. When in doubt, Obi-Wan always deferred to a strategy which did not fail him thus far: trust in the Force. It provided for them. The ship tremored again and the gravity shifted once more. The shaft turned from a straight downfall into a sliding against its wall. Checked behind him, Obi-Wan saw it would not be enough. The turbolift was coming down far, far faster than any of their attempts to outrun it. R2. Anakin grabbed his comlink, at the forefront of their group now. Open the elevator doors. All of them. Everywhere. So they did, and the four of them skidded through them, falling on top of one another in a heap, the turbolift blazing right on through the shaft. In a groaning tangle of bodies, they lied there for a moment, Obi-Wan rising first, then Palpatine and finally Anakin. Dooku, remarkably, stayed quite asleep in spite of three full-grown men crashing on top of him. Well, Anakin said, nonchalantly, helping the Chancellor up. That wasn't so bad. Not so bad? Palpatine repeated, his hair disheveled and expression of pure disbelief. Well, in comparison to some other instances, this ended quite well, Obi-Wan said mildly, taking point in their group once again until a loud cough from Anakin caught his attention. He turned to his former Padawan and immediately disliked the look there. What? I think it would be better if I took point. He badly attempted not to smile. I'm still armed, remember? Obi-Wan let out a long-suffering sigh and nodded along. Taking over Dooku carrying duties, he walked over to the back of the group, all the while shaking his head at the idea of never living down this particular blunder. The Hoi broth incident suddenly seemed far more preferable. Anakin's lightsaber never left his hand. With a steady march, not too slow or too fast, they walked through the corridor, an intersection on the far end of it. Nothing showed up to cause them any more trouble. Even the gravitational shift seemed to have stopped, for the time being. It was too easy all of a sudden, and the proximity of the dark side bothered him as well. He hoped that with Dooku unconscious, unable to consciously draw on the chilling power, the fogged-up currents of the Force would become clearer. Many times, the old masters of the Jedi spoke about a clearer time when the Force was clean, when one could feel its soothing energies flow through you. It was a time before Anakin arrived. In truth, his relationship to the Force before his talk with Obi-Wan outside of Tithe was distant. He could draw on it, feel it empower him, and his wayward emotions empower it. But it wasn't until some things cleared from Anakin's own mind did he realize just what Masters Yoda, Obi-Wan and many more talked about regarding the Force and the dark side's influence on it. It was as though there was a constant fog in his mind's eye. A rainstorm blasting against the front view mirror of his speeder. An iron storm threatening to shut down some key part of his starfighter's systems. Momentarily, Anakin let himself think about how they should have killed Dooku, to lift this nuisance away. He let it flow out. If there was one advantage to this clearer head, this improved relationship with the Force, it was a feeling of certainty. That he could let go of things and things would work out. He'd seen the practical application of that when he saved Obi-Wan from a caved-in skull. Unfortunately, the same instinct didn't save him from banging against a circular ray shield surrounding them upon reaching the intersection. The rest of their party almost crashed into him. It was a transparent-looking, shimmering barrier of pure energy. It was also impossibly difficult to get rid of once you just so happened to get trapped inside it. A fact that didn't stop Anakin from trying to cut out all the same. His lightsaber tip barely touched the barrier before large sparks exploded from contact, the sudden force almost knocking the weapon out of his hands. That's not good. No, not at all, Obi-Wan said, looking around, frowning at the shield. Arms on both hips. The dark side, Anakin murmured with a steady breath. Indeed. Even with Dooku defeated, our actions are still awry. And the fact they're able to follow us so easily. Anakin aimed his saber to the deck at his feet next. Driving his blade effortlessly through durasteel, there was a brief hope it would work when something stopped it halfway in. Once again, sparks flew and the weapon almost flew out of his hand. The ceiling's probably reinforced like this too. He took his comlink out. R2? R2? We need your help with the ray shield, we're trapped on floor 203. There was nothing. Not even static on the other end. Even at its most messed up transmission, there wasn't some sound or noise to let him know it worked. Anakin didn't like this silence one bit. Perhaps, Palpatine spoke up, unbothered by being essentially taken captive again from the looks of him. We should surrender to General Grievous. His forces will most assuredly deliver us to him on the Invisible Hands Bridge. At which point, he glanced at Anakin, you will be able to deal with him as well. Killing Grievous. It was a thought Anakin entertained and deeply hoped to realize ever since he and Obi-Wan learned of his debut appearance on Hyperi, where he butchered multiple knights and defeated even council members. The scourge of the Republic, murderer of countless worlds, a living nightmare to anyone unfortunate enough to strike him down. Anakin almost let himself imagine it playing out this way: Grievous cut down, Dooku captured, the war over. 3 years of blood and death over in a spectacular stroke. It was a fun thought to entertain, but reality wouldn't accommodate it. Letting the thought out, Anakin immediately knew the folly of it. Trying to fight Grievous would be doable if it was just him and Obi-Wan. But it wasn't. The Chancellor would be in the middle of this skirmish. All it would take is a single blaster bolt deflected wrongly to end the man holding the Republic together. Dooku's death would be a blow too. With him gone, valuable information about the Separatists' plans and the secret Sith Lord would die with him. From the careful look of consideration on Obi-Wan's face beside him, he knew they were on the same data pad. I'm sorry, sir, Anakin let his voice mean it while his eyes firmly met the Chancellor's. But we can't risk that. There are too many things that could go wrong. Even for some of my death-defying reputation. Obi-Wan smiled. The Chancellor nodded, looking strangely disappointed but didn't voice any objections. Patience you must have until the mud settles and the water becomes clear. Exactly. Anakin looked around. A few droids will show up, they'll have to drop the ray shield to take us into custody. When they do, we'll deal with them. Considering our predicament, we have little other choices. Obi-Wan frowned again, stroking his beard. Though, I do hope they don't send destroyer droids. Anakin's thought of reality rarely accommodating one's fantasies was proven quite true when one of the 2 doors at the intersection slid upward, opening the path to 8 destroyer droids. 4 in the south corridor, 4 in the east. Through those same doorways, these 8 were backed up by 16 marching super battle droids. From the west corridor, before someone could make a smart comment about things not possibly getting any worse, they did. 4 final droids joined the escort, and they were unlike any Anakin or Obi-Wan had seen in the war thus far. They walked in pairs, perfect synchronicity in a deceptively human-like way. All 4 were 2 meters tall, bodies made of grey durasteel, white cloaks swirling about their shoulders. Their photoreceptors glowed red, mouths shaped into upturned squares. Each one of them carried a staff weapon, strikingly similar to what the Senate Guard armed themselves. They'd seen battle too. Their white cloaks were stained. Anakin had a pretty good idea of what those came from. 2 had light burn marks on their left shoulder and right thigh respectively. One of them had a damaged photoreceptor. This one pointed his staff at them and spoke with a modular voice. Jedi, drop your weapons. Immediately. Grievous personal guard, Obi-Wan whispered, eyeing them with mild interest. Jedi killers, Anakin muttered back, remembering the reports of survivors who'd run into these. Apparently, they were a match for knights, even masters, and personally trained by Grievous himself in the ways of Jedi lightsaber combat. He glanced at the Chancellor over his shoulder. It seems we'll be doing things your way, sir. He smiled, in spite of their worsening situation. This time, my boy. This time. Anakin's earlier assessment of the Force was correct, most of the time. When he was a young Padawan in the temple, anxious for his future in the Order at the time, Obi-Wan felt the clear currents of the Force as one might feel a warm, soothing heat on their skin under a bright, shining sun. The sensation was always a welcome one, always putting him at peace. Even during the long nights, he feared being sent in the Jedi Service Corps. It was a clearer time, a simpler time, the last throes of an age of peace coming to an end in the corporeal and incorporeal worlds. Obi-Wan would have taken it less for granted had he known how very complicated matters would become in 2 short decades. The dark side cast a blanket over the Force. The same way fog, storm clouds or overpollution blotted out a planet's sun. It left many of the older Jedi troubled, and worse still, several generations who'd never experienced the sensation. Obi-Wan found this one of the most profound losses in these trying times. However, even the thickest of fogs or storm clouds occasionally relent, allowing a small ray of sunlight to burst through. The Force was no different. Obi-Wan instinctively felt the sensation again as he, Anakin, R2, and the Supreme Chancellor were led toward the Invisible Hands Bridge. Feeling out through the Force, he felt everything and everyone. He sensed Anakin, strong and calm in the Force, and slightly surprised by the similar sensation now passing over him as well. He sensed Palpatine, a firm rock in spite of their situation. He sensed the multitudes of Neimoidians on the bridge, anxious, worried and afraid for their safety, for the integrity of the perpetually tremoring ship. Lastly, he sensed hatred. Raw, limitless and insatiable hatred directed at himself and Anakin. This hatred proved Grievous was not a droid, as some superstitions among the Republic and even Jedi claimed. Only mostly one. What little there was left of this feared and hated being once was masked by a body of white armorplast and durasteel. His body a twisted perversion of a human skeleton combined with, what Obi-Wan assumed, were features of his native species. 6 fingers on both hands, clawed feet large enough to clash or crush someone's skull. A black cape with a collection of lightsabers arranged inside. Lastly, his skull face, revealing only 2 yellow-slitted eyes. Even hunched over, General Grievous was an impressive display of mechanical malignancy given form. Obi-Wan and Anakin both did not feel so much as a quiver of fear at his approach, merely standing their ground as though he were no threat at all. The Magna Guard with the damaged photoreceptor stepped forward, handing Grievous their lightsabers, even Obi-Wan's. No doubt the general sent one of the bodyguards after it in the shaft. In each hand, the leader of the Separatist army appraised his new trophies, oblivious to the turbolaser fire outside of his ship steadily losing all control. Obi-Wan sensed a flicker of something one might mistake for joy during this brief process. The lightsabers of Generals Kenobi and Skywalker. He drawled out, in a deep, accented and modulated voice. Fine additions to my new collection. Along with the honor of your deaths. No one needs to die here today, Obi-Wan said mildly. Simply surrender and no harm shall come to you. With menacing clanks of his clawed feet against the durasteel deck, Grievous approached, towering over him. So confident in your victory, General? Calm, Obi-Wan corrected, seeing his own reflection in those yellow, hateful eyes. His ears pricking up on the electronic growl in what passed as Grievous' throat. I meant what I said, surrender and we can end all violence immediately. He's telling the truth, General, Anakin spoke up, sounding as calm as he felt as well. I think we'd all like this war to end. Might as well start now. Anakin Skywalker, Grievous practically hissed out, clawing his way over to him. The hero with no fear, proposing a peaceful solution? I was led to believe Kenobi was the negotiator here. Anakin smiled, face inches from Grievous. We switch roles. It keeps things interesting. Obi-Wan sensed Grievous' temper flare, durasteel fingers gripping tightly on both of the blades. What he did not sense was an immediate danger. Anger was replaced by confusion and then greater anger when the general spotted one of his Magna Guards situated in the back, holding a still unconscious Count Dooku by the fiber cord between in his free hand, dangling off the ground as though he were a life-sized children's party toy. Another electronic growl graced Obi-Wan's ears. What is the meaning of this? Why is Count Dooku still tied up? He spun around to a nearby Neimoidian, the nearest and only one on the bridge not at one of the multitudes of control consoles. The usual green complexion of his species was now bright pink. There was an undercurrent of fear present in all of the other, living, separatist members of the bridge. But not of the Republic or even Jedi but of Grievous. With loud, commanding steps, cape flowing behind him, Grievous approached the lone, standing Neimoidian who pressed his data firmly against his chest, as though it would somehow protect him. I told you to rescue the Count. Why you did, General, he stammered out, lips quivering. But you never told me to. A loud crunching noise silenced the Neimoidian, forever. With a speed few could dare to defend against, much less follow, Grievous' fist did not strike so much as mutilate the head. What was left of the crewmate fell with a loud thud. Grievous growled, staring at his blood-stained hand. Disgusting creatures, Neimoidians. It was all the distraction they could have hoped for. R2, Anakin commanded, pushing himself and Palpatine down. Obi-Wan did the same and did not take his eyes off Grievous even as R2 unleashed every bit of custom equipment his old Padawan had built into him. Sparks, noise, bursts of electricity and most usefully of all, A small custom-made flamethrower burst out into a circle as the small astromech droid took flight. A flamethrower strong enough to burn through Durasteel and did so, engulfing several of the super battle droids in their immediate vicinity. While Grievous still turned, shock and confusion pulsating out of him through the Force, the Jedi went to work. Anakin thrust both palms to their immediate back, blasting super battle droids, Magna Guard and most importantly, droidekas to the ground. Obi-Wan did the same at the front, launching separatist forces to the lower console portion of the bridge. His primary target, however, was Grievous. He tried to claw his feet into the Durasteel but a precious few moments too late. Grievous growled as he flew into a nearby wall, both lightsabers falling from his grasp. Their owners summoned them back in the time it took for their adversaries to make their move. Igniting in midair, the bright blue blade swung once, cutting their creator's shackles. Standing tall, firm and back-to-back, Obi-Wan and Anakin looked at the droids surrounding them. The former, very pointedly, looking at Grievous kneeling on the floor. "My offer of surrender still stands." Grievous braced himself on a nearby console moments before ripping it out of the floor and hurling it at both Jedi. The pair split, Obi-Wan moving to the console portion while Anakin stayed firmly close to block the bridge door. "Kill them!" he screamed. "Kill them all!" The barrage of blaster fire was brief and completely useless, as Grievous expected it would be. Especially with the droidekas uselessly fumbling at the entrance, twisting on their sides or backs. Without a firm standing position, they could not properly attack, activate their shields or roll. All their lethality was rendered non-existent. Grievous had told that Kurganray to install a propulsion system or magnetization feature on their feet to prevent a simple Jedi trick from remaining effective. He would have words with him again if he should survive this battle. Something which he found increasingly unlikely as he hung back and observed the Jedi's techniques. At first, he thought to study them, letting the mechanical processes of his artificially enhanced brain determine where and how they struck so as to gain an advantage over them in the inevitable clash to come. Yet, these two Jedi, they unnerved him. At one point, Skywalker deflected a blaster bolt from a super battle droid in such a way it ricocheted several times across the bridge and decapitated an ordinary battle droid behind Kenobi. Kenobi himself returned the favor for Skywalker mere moments later. More disturbing was the fact they executed this perfectly while battling two of his trained Magna Guards at the same time. Kenobi was an impenetrable wall, swinging his lightsaber this way and that, never seeming to move more than he needed to and almost predicting their attacks. It was ease rivaling Count Dooku's own. Skywalker was more dispassionately aggressive, launching immediate counterattacks to buy himself room and time while he wilted the remaining blaster-firing droids down. Already, Grievous could see the minor nicks and slashes he'd left on IG-102 and 104. Minor wounds which would inevitably allow him to carve them to pieces. Most disturbing of all was how calm Skywalker seemed while doing this. His face relaxed even as his blade carved a smoking swath through Durasteel. Palpatine, that sniveling coward, had retreated somewhere else, possibly under one of the consoles. Grievous momentarily considered going after him, to try and salvage this deteriorating situation. Perhaps if Count Dooku were awake and armed himself they could turn the tide in their favor. Instead, the old Sith Lord laid on the ground, behind IG-104, amidst a burnt, sliced pile of worthless battle droids. Well, if he could not capture Palpatine, he would not allow himself or the Count to suffer that fate. Rising to full height, Grievous unhooked two lightsabers from his cape and went for Skywalker, in the midst of cutting IG-102 at the waist then the head. His body turned toward IG-104, his back turned towards Grievous. For a moment, the separatist droid general almost entertained the notion that they could reverse their situation. With Skywalker, even Kenobi would give up or become overwhelmed. Instead of cutting the young Jedi's head off, however, Grievous' blades were met by Skywalker's own. Without even turning around, his lightsaber positioned behind his back in a single hand, Skywalker kicked IG-102's discarded staff into the air, grabbed it with his free hand and rammed it into 104's already damaged photoreceptor. Grievous growled and went for another strike. Skywalker, almost limp, fell to the ground as Grievous' blades carved his own bodyguard in half. Knowing his own feet would soon suffer the same fate, Grievous leapt, avoiding the Jedi's blade swing and landed with his back turned towards the exit. Skywalker was on his feet in an instant, a gem so heavy guard above his head. Your reputation is well earned, Skywalker. And yours so far isn't. Growling at the impudent child in front of him, Grievous spun both his wrists at 360-degree circles at his sides. The blades sizzled and carved through the deck with his slow, steady approach. Skywalker did not so much as flinch. Not even when Grievous' assault began, well over a dozen lightsaber blows a second, did he move a single step back. The air immediately around them transformed into a twisting, blinding storm of blue and green energy. Both of them an onslaught onto themselves. For every blow Grievous sent, Skywalker blocked and immediately returned with equal or greater force. One could not tire and the other seemingly wouldn't either. They could have fought like this forever, Grievous realized. His curiosity was almost as such to test the limits of the hero with no fear's limits. However, that would simply not do. Not here or now. Unclipping his hands, transforming 2 into 4, he intentionally let it appear as though he was reaching for extra blades out of his cape. Skywalker most definitely would have heard of that particular picture from his Jedi peers and superiors. Instead, however, Grievous' left foot shot behind him, where the astromech droid was busy setting fire to the still-functioning upper body of IG-104 and grabbed it firmly around its head. It whined and screeched so annoyingly, it was all Grievous could do to not crash it to pieces right then and there. He was almost tempted to. Skywalker seemed fond of the worthless little trash compactor from his turbolift discussion with Kenobi. R2, Skywalker shouted, his concentration broken just enough for Grievous to fling the worthless little trash bin into his chest. Grunting, the Jedi fell, back smashing into a nearby console. Grievous fought the urge to try and carve him to pieces. Instead, he spun around, rushing for the door. With the leftmost lower arm, he grabbed the fiber cord tying Dooku's limbs behind his back and slashed at the door's control panel. Skywalker was already on his feet, rushing for the door when it slammed into his face. Cackling, Grievous ran on, toward one of the multitudes of escape pods ready with pre-programmed micro-jumps to remove them from Coruscant. Back into the Outer Rim, where they could regroup and plan their revenge. Anakin banged against the door, feeling Dooku's unconscious signature in the Force slip further and further away. After everything they'd done, after all the trouble they'd gone through, Dooku and Grievous both were going to escape. Anakin couldn't help it then, the anger and frustration of old was coming back out. Fear for what they would do, what they could do more, it only made things worse. There was a time, very recently, these feelings kept pushing him along, kept him calm and focused. Not anymore. He wanted them gone. The chill of the dark side he could intimately feel, it was seeping into Anakin. The suffocating, black fog around the Force creeping into his lungs, chilling his bones. Bracing himself against the door, he shook his head and breathed. Long and hard, he did so. Searching for the calming warmth of the Force from just a few moments ago. Eventually, in this standing, meditative position, he did so. He let it flow in, out and back into him again. The chill receding, his throat able to breathe again. Anakin let all those negative, crippling emotions vanish into the Force. They were a distraction, a weight he'd carried on his shoulders since he was a boy. This was not the time or place to let them do so again. Anakin? Anakin? He turned around, back held straight to see the Chancellor Palpatine there. A look of fatherly concern on his face. Are you all right, my boy? R2 was at his side next, letting out a concerned whoop. Actually. He cast another look at the door, feeling the last of Dooku's signature slip far and far away. When he looked back at Palpatine, the fact didn't bother him much at all anymore. Yes, I am. Are you sure? Anakin grabbed him by the shoulders, helping keep the Chancellor's balance when the most violent tremor so shook the invisible hand. This one didn't stop for a moment. Instead, it intensified. Anakin thought they'd suffer another gravity shift, but the truth turned out far worse. Somewhere, in the spire connecting the bridge to the ships, the main hull began to groan, like a man trapped inside a very, very deep hole. Durasteel putting out a sound like that could only mean one thing: it was bending. If it bent far enough it would snap. With another calming breath, Anakin led the Chancellor and R2 back to the pilot's console, avoiding the scraps of dismembered battle droids all over the place. Obi-Wan was already there, just finished taking out his 2 Magna Guards, hands pressed against the long console table where alarms and alerts of all kinds rang through the bridge. The ship, It's going to. I know. I heard it too. The groaning got louder, so did the alarms. A second later, they had to hold on for dear life onto vacant pilot chairs to not get tossed up and down the whole bridge. Outside the frontal view, the battle drifted away from them. Or rather, they drifted away from it. And exactly half of the invisible hand. The escape pods. They're gone. Grievous must have told them all to launch remotely from his armor somehow. Anakin shook his head, immediately sitting himself down at the main pilot's seat. Already, he saw another problem with this nascent idea. He couldn't speak Neimoidian and neither could Obi-Wan. From the view screen, Coruscant came into view, growing larger with each passing moment, alongside the fire burning on the bridge's view corners. You two better sit down and buckle up. They did so, Obi-Wan remaining perfectly calm as always in the Force. Palpatine seemed frazzled by this development, clinging to his armchairs enough for his knuckles to whiten. Not that Anakin could blame the man. Even for a Jedi, this situation would be difficult. Can you land it? Obi-Wan shouted over the combined noise of alerts and ship rumbling. Anakin didn't immediately answer. Instead, he breathed. Even in this chaos, in this situation of almost certain death, the Force did not falter. Stretching out with his feelings, he felt the same coming from Obi-Wan, Palpatine's worry. He even felt R2 beeping in a frenzy. He let his hands hover above the controls whose language he could not understand at all, whose systems were designed for non-human fingers, controls for a ship never designed to land at all and half of which was left floating in space. Wordlessly, he answered Obi-Wan with a glance. His master understood immediately. Through the two of them as vessels, through their experiences in flight and the steady, purposeful movements of their hands, the Force took action. Almost gliding across the controls, the Jedi activated the only systems left that could make the impossible just very difficult. Atmospheric drag fins deployed, in deliberate, careful cycles, slowing down the ship's descent without getting burned off. The ship rumbles like the inside of a gargantuan, angry beast against this gradual slowing down as it entered the upper atmosphere. When the drag fins are of no more use, Anakin and Obi-Wan glide to other controls, without blinking or even looking at them, their eyes transfixed to the growing view of Coruscant before them. Exterior hatches open and close and open again, in a rhythmic, musical tact a trained entertainer group could dance to. Even when Coruscant was right under them, when the ship shook violently, when R2 and Palpatine both shrieked in growing fear, the Jedi remained the calm eyes of the storm. They both knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that even this clouded Force would not let them down.